The story of that first Easter morning is told in all four Gospels, but I particularly love the version told in the Gospel of John. In John's version, after the Sabbath is over, so very early on Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene goes all by herself to prepare the body of Jesus for burial. So she is the first to see that the large stone blocking the tomb has been moved and the tomb is empty. And an understandable alarm, believing that Jesus' body has been taken, because what else would possibly make sense? She races to get Simon Peter and another of the disciples who is just referred to as the disciple Jesus loved, but probably was John. And she brings them back to show them that the body of their beloved leader is gone. Well, the two other disciples, Simon Peter and John, leave as soon as they've seen. Maybe they have run to tell all the others who have gone to ground in the city, not wanting to call attention to themselves. Or maybe they just wanted to get out of there, because all of the disciples were afraid of being associated with Jesus, with this political dissident leader who had just been publicly executed. But we are told that Mary Magdalene stays. Danger or no danger. She stays outside the tomb crying. And when she bends down to look inside it again, maybe just to check again, because how can it be true that his body is really missing? She sees two angels sitting inside the tomb, and they ask her why she is crying. And as the writer and theologian Kate Bowler points out, this is kind of a heartless question to ask someone who is grieving and believes with very good reason that the body of their loved one has been taken. But Mary just answers. She doesn't even seem surprised they are there. And she tells them, they have taken away the body of my beloved teacher, and I don't know where he is. And then she stands up and turns around and practically bumps into another man who asks her the same seemingly heartless question, why are you crying? And the author of the Gospel of John tells us right away that it is Jesus, but Mary doesn't know yet. She doesn't recognize him because it's impossible that he could be alive. So she mistakes him for a gardener, or maybe the groundskeeper of the cemetery, and says to him the most logical thing, which is, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him." And then Jesus says her name, Mary, and she knows who he is. There's so much I love about this story. First of all, that Mary goes alone and she stays. She stays at the tomb to grieve when the others have run away. She is so brave in her grief. And I recognize that bravery because I have seen it so many times in so many of you. I have seen how brave you are in the midst of sorrow, and I have seen how you do not run away from what is hard. And I love that she mistakes Jesus for the gardener. It makes sense. She isn't expecting to see him. How could she be expecting to see him? So her mind just goes to the most logical explanation of who this ragged-looking, dirt-covered person standing in front of her must be. Another wonderful theologian, Nadia Bolz-Weber, imagines how Mary probably never lived down this particular mistake. Nadia Bolz-Weber writes, if the disciples were anything like my friends, for the rest of her life, after they'd all had a beer, the disciples would be like, hey, Mary, remember the time you mistook Jesus for the gardener? But here's the thing. If Mary actually thought Jesus was the gardener, what does that say about how he looked? Not great, is what I'm guessing. Maybe like someone who made his living digging in the dirt. Maybe like someone who just spent the past 3 days inside a tomb. And to me, this is such a good reminder of all of the ways the church has made the mistake of trying to clean up Jesus through the centuries. All of the ways the institutions created in his name have tried to make him all neat and clean and tidy, when his life, insofar as we actually know about it, was none of those things at all, and neither was his death. Jesus spent time with the people others had labeled unclean, untouchable, dirty. He loved hanging out with people who were generally despised, the tax collectors and the sex workers and those with leprosy. He didn't even have a home. He stayed with friends. He told people to leave everything behind and come with him. And he said these radical and very unsettling things, like the first shall be last and the last shall be first, and sell everything you have and give it to the poor. And then he died the painful death of a criminal, a political dissident, a troublemaker. Kate Buller says maybe it wasn't a mistake that Mary thought it was the gardener. Maybe it was actually prophetic, because gardeners know a lot about dirt and mud and new life. Gardeners know what hope looks like. They plant seeds in the cold ground and tend to them and wait, and they have faith that these tiny, lifeless-looking little specks are actually going to become something when you add water and sunshine and time. So maybe Mary was just recognizing the true nature of Jesus when she called him the gardener, someone who tended and fed and nurtured people, someone who believed in transformation. But my very favorite part of the story is how Mary recognizes Jesus as soon as he says her name. It's only the one word, Mary. But the moment he says her name, she knows him. It is the tiniest detail, but so poignant. She hears her name spoken in love. She hears her name said like a blessing, and that changes everything. He says her name as someone who knows her heart, as someone who sees her soul. And because of all of that, she recognizes him. She knows him too. Jan Richardson writes, "You will not remember the words. All you need to remember is how it sounded when you stood in the place of death and heard the living call your name." We have all stood in the place of death, whether it was the death of someone we have loved, the death of our own hopes, the death of important relationships, the death of the plans we had, or the death that comes when things we were certain were whole turn out to be broken, and things we were certain were true turn out not to be true at all. But I pray that we all also know what it means to hear the living call our names, to hear our names spoken in love, and to come back from that place of despair to feel something shift in us, if not toward hope, then toward the hope of hope. I pray that we have all felt the great weight lesson. And if you are still in that place of death, I pray that you will hold on, because this is not where the story ends. We can't possibly know what happened that first Easter morning. We only know that something must have. Something that allowed those grieving, terrified disciples to gather themselves, to find each other, and to find their way back to hope again. We can only see with our own eyes and with the limits of our imagination. But sometimes the endings are beyond those limits. Mary saw Jesus as a gardener because that's all that made sense to her, but the ending was so much better than that. And I know there is so much suffering in our world right now. It is hard to imagine how we heal. But I also know that my imagination is so small. And the possibility for love to have the final word is not dependent on what I can imagine. And maybe that's the hope of Easter morning. That even when we find ourselves in the places of death, life can still call back to us. Love can still call us by name and beckon us back. And that is true even when we cannot imagine a better ending. Even when we can't begin to understand how love will have the final word.